The oil platforms of the Persian Gulf are not what most people picture when they think of offshore energy infrastructure. They are not the solitary, isolated structures of the North Sea or the Gulf of Mexico. Single platforms separated by miles of open water, their nearest neighbor a distant smudge on the horizon. The Gulf's platforms cluster. They exist in groups, connected by underwater pipelines and above-water catwalks, and the service boat traffic that cycles continuously between them, carrying crew shifts and supplies, and the maintenance personnel whose work keeps the valves turning and the gas flares burning, and the petroleum flowing northward through the pipeline networks that terminate at the loading terminals, where tankers queue in the pre-dawn hours. Between the platforms, the water is shallow, rarely more than 40 meters, and the navigational chart is dense with the hazard markings that indicate pipe crossings, anchor restrictions, and the structural footings of platforms whose positions must be avoided by any vessel transiting the area. The field in question was a producing field in the central Gulf, its platforms visible on clear days as a scattered skyline of derricks and flare stacks, rising from the otherwise featureless surface of a body of water that in this area had no land visible on any compass bearing. 8 platforms in the field, connected by a pipeline manifold, operated by a mixed national workforce of technicians and engineers, under a contract that had been in continuous operation for 11 years. The field's production fed into the regional pipeline network and ultimately into the export terminals on the western shore. Its output was not insignificant, approximately 80,000 barrels per day at current rates, a number that represented a measurable fraction of the regional contribution to the global petroleum supply. It was also, the post-engagement analysis would confirm, the most sophisticated concealment architecture the IRGCN had yet deployed in the Gulf, an operational base that had been established incrementally over a period of months, using the normal resupply and maintenance cycling of the field's operations to insert personnel and equipment that had nothing to do with petroleum production and everything to do with the engagement that was now unfolding. The destroyer had been assigned to the patrol sector that included the platform field for 16 days. In those 16 days, the field had been a feature of the radar picture, familiar, charted, logged in the navigation system as a hazard area requiring clearance during any transit of the sector. The service boats that cycled between the platforms had been tracked on the surface radar and classified as routine commercial traffic. The helicopter that the field's operator used for crew change rotations had been logged, interrogated via radio when it entered the patrol sector's airspace, identified correctly as a civilian offshore aviation asset, and released without incident. The field was background. It was infrastructure. It was part of the Gulf's operational landscape in the same way that the shipping lanes and the fishing grounds and the coastline radar returns were part of that landscape. Known, categorized, and not actively threatening. What the 16 days of observation had not captured was the 7 IRGCN operatives who had arrived at the field's maintenance platform, the westernmost of the 8 structures, the one used primarily for pipeline valve maintenance, and whose crew rotation cycle brought different personnel aboard every 2 weeks, in the guise of a contracted maintenance crew. They had arrived in a service boat that was registered to a legitimate marine support company operating under a subcontract arrangement. Their equipment had been logged at the field's supply manifest as pipeline inspection tools and valve actuator components. Their presence had been recorded in the field's personnel tracking system as a 2-week maintenance contract. They had been there for 9 days when the engagement began. During those 9 days, they had assembled, from components that had arrived in the maintenance equipment shipments, 2 things. The first was a ground-launched loitering munition system, a lightweight launcher, and a 6-unit magazine of small, radar-low observable, one-way attack drones whose individual packages had been dimensioned to fit within the declared equipment cases, without triggering the cursory inspection that the offshore supply chain applied to incoming maintenance cargo. The second was a short-range, anti-ship missile launcher, a 2-round system using a weapon variant that the IRGCN had been developing for platform-launched operations, specifically designed to be assembled from separated components that could be introduced into a supply chain individually over the course of multiple delivery cycles. The launcher platforms were positioned on the maintenance platform's lower deck level, below the visual horizon of any aerial observation at the altitudes used by the patrol helicopter, screened from the south by the platform's pipe rack structure, and oriented to cover the western approach sector of the platform field, where the destroyer's patrol track placed it at ranges between 3 and 8 nautical miles on a regular basis. At 1:15 a.m., the destroyer was 4.2 nautical miles west of the maintenance platform, transiting on a northward course that would take it to the northern boundary of the patrol sector before turning south again. The same patrol pattern it had been executing for 16 days. 4.2 nautical miles. The anti-ship missile's effective engagement range was significantly greater than 4.2 nautical miles. The electronic warfare system registered the fire control radar emission at 1:15 a.m. and 31 seconds. The bearing of the emission, 097 degrees. The range estimate from the bearing intersection with the known position of the platform field structures, consistent with the maintenance platform's location, at 4.2 nautical miles. The emission signature, classified in 1.8 seconds as consistent with the fire control system for the short-range anti-ship missile variant that the threat library carried as a possible IRGCN developmental system. The EW officer's call to the TAO was simultaneous with the launch signatures appearing on the radar. 2 contacts. From the maintenance platform bearing. Sea skimming, fast, very close, 4.2 nautical miles. At the missile's approach speed, time to impact was approximately 71 seconds. The TAO's engagement call and the commanding officer's bridge alert occurred within 5 seconds of each other. The TAO initiating the engagement sequence without waiting for the formal authorization that the proximity of the threat did not allow time for. And the commanding officer arriving in the CIC from the bridge wing where he had been watching the platform field's lights in the pre-dawn darkness, having registered the EW alarm through the ship's general alarm system before the TAO's call reached him. 2 ESSM interceptors launched at 1:15 a.m. and 49 seconds. 18 seconds from first EW detection to first ESSM launch. The timeline was the most compressed engagement sequence the ship had executed in its patrol deployment. 18 seconds from unknown to weapons-free to interceptors in the air. The ESSM's active guidance tracked the 2 inbound contacts immediately on seeker activation. The engagement geometry from a range of approximately 3.8 nautical miles. The intercept range. Because the missiles had closed during the 18-second detection-to-launch sequence, producing clean intercept solutions, both contacts eliminated. First ESSM at 3 nautical miles, second ESSM at 2.4 nautical miles. 71 seconds from estimated time of launch. Both contacts eliminated inside 40 seconds. The remaining 31 seconds of the original impact timeline were empty of threat. The radar picture showing the maintenance platform's fixed radar return where it had always been a none, and nothing else. The commanding officer reviewed the engagement data in the 12 seconds following the last intercept and called the decision that would define the next 40 minutes. The fire control radar emission had come from the maintenance platform, a structure on which, by the field operator's personnel records, approximately 14 workers were currently assigned in addition to the 7 IRGCN operatives whose presence had not been declared to anyone. The short-range missile launcher that had fired at his ship was on that platform. The launcher might have additional rounds. The 7 operatives might have the capability to fire again. The platform also had 14 workers, who had presumably had nothing to do with the decision to fire on a U.S. Navy warship from their workplace. He could not engage the platform with the weapons available to him. The 5-inch gun, the CIWS, the deck mounts, without accepting the certainty of causing structural damage to an occupied civilian industrial installation and the probability of causing casualties among the civilian workers on the structure. That was not a tactical calculation. It was a legal and moral one, and it produced the same answer regardless of how the tactical pressure was applied to it. He would not fire on the platform. What he could do was move. He ordered maximum speed and a course change to the southwest. Opening range from the platform, presenting the ship's narrowest radar cross-section to the bearing, and creating the kinetic margin that additional distance provided against a second launch from the same position. He also ordered the ship's 25mm deck mount to track the platform bearing continuously, and authorized engagement of any airborne contact that emerged from the platform's bearing at close range. A defensive authorization that committed to a response without committing to an unprovoked assault on a fixed structure. At 1:17 a.m., the loitering munitions launched. 6 contacts in rapid succession from the maintenance platform's bearing. the launch signatures appearing on the radar picture as the drones climbed from their launcher and adopted their sea-skimming approach profiles. Not from the anti-ship missile launcher, which had apparently expended its 2-round magazine in the initial salvo. From the drone system, the lightweight launcher, whose 6-unit magazine was now committing its full inventory in a single salvo. 6 contacts. The destroyer was now at 5 nautical miles from the platform, having opened distance during the 45 seconds since the first launch. 5 nautical miles from the launch point. The drone's speed placed them at impact range in approximately 4 minutes and 20 seconds at the destroyer's current separation. The engagement geometry had a feature that the platform's IRGCN operators had apparently not fully accounted for in their targeting calculation. The destroyer's course change had placed it on a bearing from the platform, where the approach geometry for the 6 drones converged on a different position than where the ship currently was. The drones had been launched on approach profiles calculated against the ship's previous position and heading, the northward transit track that the destroyer had been executing for 16 days. The emergency course change to the southwest had introduced a position offset that the drone's pre-programmed guidance profiles did not automatically correct for. 3 of the 6 drones were flying profiles that would bring them close to the ship's current position, their pre-programmed bearings intersecting the ship's new track within engagement parameters. 3 were flying profiles that would carry them past the ship's new position without closing to within the CYWS engagement envelope. Their approach angles too far off the ship's revised bearing to self-correct without a guidance update from a controller, who was apparently not providing one. The 3 off-bearing contacts were logged as non-threatening and continued to monitor without engagement. 3 inbound contacts. The ESSM battery was the response. 2 ESSM interceptors against the 2 leading contacts. The same allocation that had addressed the anti-ship missiles 12 seconds after the launch. First ESSM intercept confirmed at 3.8 nautical miles from the ship. Second ESSM confirmed at 3.1 nautical miles. The third contact was at 2.6 nautical miles when the CIWS forward mount acquired it and engaged. The burst connected at 2 nautical miles. Contact eliminated. The 3 off-bearing contacts continued on their programmed tracks, passed well clear of the ship's current position, and eventually reached the end of their fuel endurance and impacted the water surface between 4 and 7 nautical miles northwest of the destroyer. Their detonations, small and scattered across the dark water, were visible on the forward camera feeds as brief flashes of orange-white light that produced no tactical consequence, and served only to confirm that they had been carrying functional warheads and were not inert decoys. At 1:19 a.m. and 44 seconds, the radar picture was clear of active threat contacts. 4 minutes and 13 seconds from first fire control radar emission to last CIWS engagement. 2 anti-ship missiles and 6 loitering munitions launched from a civilian oil platform at close range. 4 ESSM interceptors and approximately 900 CIWS rounds expended. 0 hull strikes. 0 personnel casualties. The commanding officer had the maintenance platform in sight from the bridge wing. The flare stack's glow was visible at 5 nautical miles, the platform's deck lights creating a diffuse illumination that silhouetted the pipe rack structure against the pre-dawn sky. He could see the platform that had fired on his ship. He did not fire on it. He transmitted the contact report to 5th Fleet and requested guidance on the appropriate response framework for an attack launched from an occupied civilian industrial platform in international waters. The request included the EW recording of the fire control radar emission, the radar track data from both missile engagements, and his own assessment of the platform's personnel status based on the field operator's records that the operations center had retrieved during the engagement. 5th Fleet acknowledged the contact report and initiated the response framework assessment that the situation required. The assessment involved the Judge Advocate General's Office, the Theater Command Authority, the State Department's Regional Desk, and the Intelligence Communities assessment of the IRGCN operatives' status under the laws of armed conflict. It would take several hours. During those hours, the destroyer maintained a watch on the maintenance platform from a distance of 8 nautical miles. Laosei. Close enough to monitor the platform's radar return for any indication of additional launch activity, far enough to provide meaningful reaction time if a third engagement sequence began. No third engagement sequence occurred. The IRGCN operatives on the maintenance platform, having expended their available weapons inventory in 2 salvos that had produced 0 damage to the target, apparently made the assessment that continued presence on the platform was no longer operationally viable. The field operator's service boat, which had been lying to approximately 2 nautical miles east of the maintenance platform throughout the engagement, was tracked on the surface radar, moving to the platform at 1:47 a.m. It was alongside the platform for approximately 22 minutes. When it departed at 2:09 a.m., it was moving northeast at maximum speed, on a course consistent with the Iranian coastline. The 7 IRGCN operatives were on that boat. The destroyer tracked it to the 12 nautical mile territorial water boundary and held its position there, unable to pursue under the rules of engagement that govern territorial water restrictions. The boat crossed the boundary and disappeared from tracking range. The post-engagement analysis identified 3 operational findings that were distributed to the fleet as immediate intelligence updates. The first finding was the supply chain infiltration. The assembly of both weapon systems from components introduced through the offshore field's legitimate supply chain. Components dimensioned to fit declared cargo cases, delivered over multiple supply cycles to avoid the concentration signature that a single large delivery would produce, represented a logistics architecture that the existing inspection and manifest protocols for offshore supply operations had not been designed to detect. The finding prompted an immediate review of offshore field resupply inspection procedures across the Gulf region. The second finding was the tactical geometry of the close-range platform attack. A weapons system on a fixed platform at 4 nautical miles represented a fundamentally different engagement timeline than any mobile threat the patrol's threat matrix had previously addressed. The 71-second impact timeline for the initial anti-ship missile salvo, from fire control radar activation to projected impact, was the shortest engagement window the ship's crew had faced in the patrol deployment. The 18-second detection-to-ESSM-launch response had been driven entirely by trained procedure, executed faster than any simulation environment had been able to replicate, because the simulation environments that the crew had trained in had assumed threat distances that provided more reaction time than 4 nautical miles provided. The third finding was the constraint. The decision not to engage the platform kinetically, made correctly, maintained under tactical pressure, confirmed as legally and morally sound by the post-engagement JAG review, had allowed the IRGCN operatives to escape. This was an outcome the commanding officer had accepted as the cost of the legal and moral decision, and the JAG review confirmed that it was the only outcome consistent with the applicable law of armed conflict. The operatives had been on a civilian platform whose workers had not participated in the attack. The workers' presence had been the effective shield. The IRGCN's operational design had incorporated that shield deliberately. Castaus had used the civilian workforce as the protection that prevented a kinetic response to the launch platform itself. The platform had been designed as a use-once asset. The weapons had been introduced, assembled, employed, and expended. The operatives had departed. The platform itself, the actual infrastructure of the oil field, was undamaged. Its civilian crew unharmed. Its production continuing on its normal schedule as if nothing had occurred. The Field Operator's Operations Center received the post-engagement notification from 5th Fleet's liaison channel and documented it in their incident report for the relevant maritime authority. The incident report described the event, noted the damage to their maintenance platform's equipment caused by the IRGCN assembly activities, and requested compensation through the diplomatic channel that their national government's foreign ministry was directed to pursue. Production continued. The flare stacks continued to burn. The service boats continued their rotations. The pipeline manifold continued to move 80,000 barrels per day toward the export terminals. The destroyer resumed its patrol. 8 nautical miles from the field, then 9. Then the patrol track carried it to the northern boundary of the sector and turned it south again. The field was on the radar picture, as it always had been. Familiar. Charted. Part of the landscape. The difference was that the landscape had revealed something. It had revealed that in the Persian Gulf, the fixed and the familiar and the civilian and the industrial were not outside the operational domain. They were part of it. Anything in the radar picture could be a weapon platform, if the adversary had the patience to prepare it and the operational discipline to wait. The patrol's job was not to monitor the active threats. It was to hold the watch against the possibility that something that looked inactive was not. That something in the background of the radar picture was waiting for the moment when the watch team's pattern recognition had fully classified it as non-threatening, and then acting. The watch continued because that moment, if it came, required someone to be ready for it. Ready not to miss it, and ready to respond to it correctly. With the discipline to fight and the judgment to know when not to. Both in the same moment, on the same watch. That was what the Gulf required. It always had been.